Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's good to see you. Today we're going to do a more advanced tutorial. Up till this point we've done some Substance Designer tutorials that were very beginner with very early concepts that still managed to make pretty good results, but today we're going to go all out. We're going to do an advanced one and we're going to run through that. I'm going to go through every single node start to finish. So on the screen right now you can see the result of what we're going to create today, and that's running in Unreal, and I'll take you through that whole process. Now in the past I've done tutorials where I've actually built the material with you and we've gone through, but this is going to be way too complicated for me to do that. So we're going to go through node by node and I'll explain what's going on. I will try to hit everything that I've changed in every node to the best of my ability, but there might be one I miss here and there, but I will have the node up on screen with all of its details. You will have to probably pause here and there throughout this video to get it, but we're going to make a high quality medieval brick wall. I am a really small channel, so maybe give me a like, a subscribe if you like this sort of stuff. Maybe give me a positive comment just to keep me motivated and going. Right now my channel gets very little views. So let's just get started. So first we're going to make our mask that defines the shape and size of our bricks in our wall. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a tile sampler. So you can see here I have this section, I call it stone size. We're going to start with a tile sampler here. And in tile sampler there's a few settings you're going to want to change. The X amount 8, Y amount 14. Pattern keep as square. Now in the future the nice thing about this is you can do all sorts of crazy things right from the beginning and it'll change things all the way down the line and give you all sorts of different options in the future. Like you want to make blocks, you want to make smaller bricks, bigger bricks, whatever. So now we go down here, scales at 1. You want to make sure that you put offset at 0.4. Rotation random, that's one that I know I did, is 0.015, and then color random here is 0.6. So I believe those are the only things I changed, but I'll scroll through one more time. This is the bottom of the settings, and most things won't have this many settings, so it'll be easier to go through the other nodes. Rotation random, yep, and we'll just start all the way back at the top, and yeah, there we go. So now we'll run that into an edge detect. Now remember to put in your nodes, just hit the space bar. And I started out with, if you go to File, New, Substance Graph, I just did Metallic Roughness, and I got rid of the metallic and the ambient occlusion. So we go to Edge Detect here, and you can see the settings down here. Width is 1.3, roundness 2.58, and tolerance is 1. And you can see when I pull it up, it makes this really nice rounded beveled mask that we can use to start building off of. Now the first thing we want to do is put a flood fill in. Now a flood fill just gives us the option to use all of the different flood fill options. What it does is it takes a black and white mask and it'll add these options so we can do different things on the insides of the white part of the mask. So then we'll put in a flood fill gradient right here. So no changes to the settings of flood fill gradient. And in here we just want to change the angle variation here to 1. And that'll make a bunch of different gradients all over, which would basically be sloping our bricks. But right now we're going to use these to chop out parts of our bricks. Then I'll put a levels on. And you want to pull your handles pretty similar to the ones I have so that you can get a really tight just in the corners. Now you can obviously play with everything as you go. Now if you want, here are the numbers for those levels if you want to pause and take a look at that. But we're going to keep moving on, and then we'll do another flood fill on that because that's a black and white mask, right? And then you can see it right here. And then now we'll add another gradient. And what this allows us to do is cut the numbers of corners down a little bit. Right now, this would be way too many corners to be cutting off of each stone. So, and we run that into a histogram select. You can see the properties here, position 0.75, range 0.38, contrast 1. And what that does, and you can play with this, it'll select different corners based on the brightness that we did here in the random gradient. Okay, and then we can use that. We'll plug in our first edge detect into a blend right here in the background. In the foreground, we'll put this levels that we did with the random flood fill gradient, and I'll show you the level settings here. You see I pulled all the handles all the way down to the left. You can put in these numbers. That just took it and turned it completely white. And now we're going to blend this using the histogram with our original edge detect. Okay? And in here, this is our result. And you're going to see me save even though I absolutely don't need to save, but that's just a habit of mine. So if you look at our end result here, we have it chipping away different corners of our rock. So we're getting a little bit of variation of our rock shape just straight away. This is a very important mask. And it goes into a very important node, which is another flood fill. So we're doing the same thing that we did before, allowing us to add flood fill variations to it. So we're going to continue on with height map stuff first, and then we'll go to the other stuff second. So we're going to take this flood fill, and I plugged it into one of these little node things you can make here, just because otherwise we'll have a million things coming out of this flood fill, because I use the flood fill for a lot of different things. So you have it come straight out from the flood fill into the node. So now we're going to do the stone bevel. Okay, so we have our mask, and now we're going to try to bevel it a little bit. So we take that flood fill and we run that into a flood fill to grayscale. That basically gives us what we had originally. You can see it here. No adjustments. And then in the bevel, and then we bevel that. What that does is it'll just pull up the sides of our stones. You can see down here what I have it set at. Distance negative 0.03, smoothing 0, normal intensity 10. Okay? That's our first section. So then we'll run our flood fill into a flood fill grayscale. And another one. So this one here, you can adjust these luminance amounts here, the 0.65 and 0.33, to give us a variation of colors inside of our mask. What that does is it'll allow some rocks to pop out more than others. So the white ones pop out more and the gray ones pop out less, and the black, of course, is going to be all the way down. So we blend those color adjustments with our bevel. We just use a multiply there, and we can do 0.55 multiply into that first blend. Then we run our flood fill into a gradient, flood fill gradient. And what that does is it's similar to, if you remember in other tutorials, we've used the big brick generator to add slopes in different directions on our bricks. So we'll do a flood fill gradient, and you can come down here. You want to make sure to do angle variation, and these are all the other settings, but I don't believe I've changed any of the other ones. And then you want to blend that over the top of this first blend here, and we'll do min darken 0.4. And you can adjust these values. The more you do, the more the stones are going to look like they kind of cut out a little bit and in. So we're going to do multiple of that operation. So we're going to do it again. But now you want to add angle variation, and you want to randomize these. So you can come up here and hit this random seed button. Now here's the seed I have for the first one. If you want to do the exact same thing, there's no reason to do the exact same thing on this because you'll get a good result. So if we go to here, same thing, angle variation into another blend, which this goes over the top of that, and that opacity is 0.04 min, and we do it one more time, same settings, same opacity of the blend. Now you can play with that but I found that that was good. So that is our stone bevel, and this is kind of what we end up with for our final result. And you can see it beveling out. You can see different corners of the stone have different gradients, so that it'll add some variation to our stones. So now we take the result of that and we come into the stone shape variation. So with this, we just want to kind of cut into this. This doesn't look all that appealing yet. So we're going to do a slope blur grayscale, turn the samples all the way up and the intensity to 0.2, and we'll slope it by this black and white spots. So plug in there to there, black and white spots into there. And on our black and white spots, we have scale 2, 0.58 for disorder, roughness 0.32, and you can see it kind of shrinks everything down, and then it kind of gets rid of some of them. And if you go in here, now you can see it start to cut into our height map a bit. Now we're going to do that again. We'll slope blur grayscale again with a little bit lower intensity, 32 samples, 1 intensity, but a different black and white spots. Scale 2, 0.58, 0.29. Now this black and white spots, it might be the same, I'm not sure, but you want to randomize it if it is, because you want a different thing. So whenever you do this, it's a good idea to just kind of randomize a couple times anyways. And then the result of that, you can kind of look in here, and you can see things are getting a little bit more crunchy and cut into our rocks. All right, so now we'll do one more slope blur grayscale. This time though, we want to turn the intensity quite a bit up to 1.44 with 32 samples. We'll do another black and white spots, and here are the settings for that: 2, 0.53, 0.09 for roughness. Now if you look in here, now you can see it's starting to cut into our rocks even more and make some sort of crazy different shapes with that one. All right, we'll do one more slope blur grayscale. This one's at 14 samples and 2 intensity. You could probably turn the samples up on that. I'll just do that. Perlin noise, and here's our Perlin scale, 3. That's it. Randomize that, pop that into our slope blur grayscale. And now we can kind of take a look. And now you start to see we're really getting some goofy shapes, and our rocks are kind of popping out in our height map here. So now let's plug the results of that, and we'll do a non-uniform directional warp. We're going to warp it by crystal. So here's the crystal settings: scale 18, disorder 0. And our warp, here's our warp settings. We have the angle I just kind of set off to the side a little bit. Intensity is 0.5. And then all of these all the way up to 1. That'll just keep warping it a little bit more like the crystal. Let's go from this one. You can see that one to that. Now you see there's more crystally warping in there. So now what we want to do is we want to add some variation to each individual rock and some more detail. So this is where we're ending here with this non-directional uniform warp, but we need to start making another train here. So put in grunge galvanic large, and here are the settings for that. I don't believe I might have changed them a little bit, but I don't believe I did. And go and invert that because I wanted it to be the dark. And then we're going to do a vector warp grayscale. So now how we do that is you have to come back here to our original flood fill, because we're going to use this for a couple things, so I'm going to leave it back here. Go from our original flood fill here, the really important one, plug it into the flood fill to random color here. And what that'll allow us to do is we can plug that into something and it'll mix things up using that. So we can take that all the way back to what we were talking about, where we did the grunge galvanic. And now you can see here's our grunge here. Here's our straight one. And now when we warp it, it uses that map and moves things around and adds these in different spots and mixes things up. So that looks pretty good. But we do need to blur that result a little bit because it's kind of too it's too uniform. So let's blur it here with this moisture noise. So the warp, vector warp grayscale, there's no settings really, so you can just leave that. But here's the moisture noise. And I did change some patterns here in the moisture noise. So you can see it's 0.16 for on the X, so then it'll pull it, horizontally. And we'll use that, and we'll use that to slope blur our detail there. And now you can see it kind of crags it up. It makes it all nice and craggy there. Now we'll take that slope blur and we're going to blend it with our first non-uniform directional warp. And what we're going to do is I'm going to do a histogram here, and what I can do is I can pull out where I want that detail to be, and that'll be the white part. So here's our histogram. And if you notice, here's the settings here, 0.95 and 0 for contrast, and that'll give us this black and white mask, and that'll allow us to blend our detail over this without getting it too much in the grouty sections. So we do the blend, and there you go, there's the result. The blend is set to overlay and 0.3. Okay, so that gives us, you can see our height map here is starting to look pretty fancy. That gives us our stone shape variation. So now what we want to do is add some cracks. So let's go down to this section here. So far we've done stone size, we've done these two flood fills, we've done stone bevel, and we've done the stone shape variation. So now let's head down here to cracks and chips. Okay, and we'll start with that. So the first thing we want to do is make a cells. And you can see the scale and the disorder, it's just at 6. You can randomize this a couple times if you want. Then run that into an edge detect so it gets the edges out. And then right here, we're going to blend that with a crystal. So here's the crystal settings, 6 and 0.6 for disorder. And we're going to blend that with our edge detect. We're going to do min darken, opacity 1. And you can see here how it puts in our edges plus the cells. We'll do another edge detect on that. And you'll notice it does all of these cool spiderwebby effects, right? So now for this edge detect, I think I added a little roundness. So edge width 1 and 0.1 for roundness. And tolerance is 1. I'm not sure if any of those were changed. Now, for me, doing cracks, I have a harder time seeing the black and white version, so I inverted it with an invert grayscale so I can have white be the cracks. And I did a directional warp on that, and here's the crystal. Let's look at the crystal first. It's a scale 13, disorder 0.72 into a directional warp. You can see how it warps our cracks around a little bit. I don't like to have the cracks too wavy. And then we'll run that directional warp into another slope blur. And here's the settings for that, 32 and 0.055. And we'll plug the same crystal into that again. So you can see it blurs the slopes, adds more variation in here using that crystal. So we go from this to that. Okay? Now we run that into a vector warp grayscale. And that's that same one that we did up here. And what that allows us to do is we plug that color map, the flood fill to random color that we got here, and I kind of ran this down. Always use these little pinny guys to help you keep organized. Pinned in here, and then pinned in here. And what that does is, again, it takes all the cracks and spins them all around and puts different cracks in each different rock. See? So it makes that kind of deal. And then we'll run that into a slope blur. This is the black and white spots we use to do the blur. This is like, the settings for this are 4.87 and 0.43, and they go into the slope blur. And you can see the slope blur is at 32 and 0.1. And if you look at it, you can see it's kind of blurring in there. It's kind of making our cracks chippy and cracky. Now I leveled that a little bit. You can see I brought the white value down, and you can see here the numbers that I did for that. Or if you want to just do a guesstimate, just pull the white handle down. All right, so now we have our cracks and chips. We need to blend that with our stone shape variation. So the first thing we need to do is we bring, you see this flood fill, we need that. So we pull that flood fill all the way down here, and we do, I have a pin here because we're going to use that flood fill again. We're going to do it flood fill to gradient because we're going to make a mask to blend the chips with the original height map we had going on. So flood fill to gradient, and I'll show you here. I just did angle variation again into a levels, pulled the level handle sliders down to get something so that we would have cracks on part of a rock, but then they'd fade out, sort of thing. So this levels goes into the blend. Our cracks go over the top. You can see the cracks here over the top. The end of this train, which was our original stuff, goes second. And in our blend, we set it to subtract because our cracks are white, and so then it'll subtract it and turn it darker. And I put the opacity at 0.2. Now, if you want the cracks to stand out more, you can obviously up that. If you look in here, here's the result of our cracks laid over our original height map. All right. So now we want to add a little bit more detail, like pushy outy parts of the rocks, like maybe corners and things like that. We only want to have them in certain sections. So what I'm going to do is take that blend and run it into this histogram, select, and you can see what I put here, 0.8, 0.28, and 0. And what that did is it masks off these corners. And then we use some crystals here. Like here's the first crystal, 32 disorder 0. We'll do a slope blur on that to go from this to this, which warps it just a little bit. You can look in here and you'll see perfect, and then more craggy and rocky. And we slope blur it by this black and white spots. You can see scale 2, disorder 0.24, roughness 0.48. So we slope blur it by that. See the difference here. Now we'll do a directional warp, non-uniform directional warp, and it'll kind of swirl it around and make it even crazier. We'll do the same black and white spots into that warp. You can see the intensity, the angle. You can see trail length, trail fade, and trail curve. Okay? Trail length 0, fade 1, curve 0. So now we'll run this. We'll take our original here. We'll blend this over the top using that histogram that we made. And we'll go to the blend. And that's overlay 1. So now, not there, there. You can see it adds some pushy outy details here and there. All right, so next we run that into a slope blur grayscale, and we can use that original black and white spots we made for all of this stuff and plug that into here just to add a little bit more variation to all of it. And we'll just put the intensity at, for this slope blur grayscale, we'll just put the intensity at 0.02. Now you can see more and more detail starting to happen within our stone. So let's just, now we're going to blend some grunge concrete over that. Now what that'll do is it'll kind of give us even those really, really fine details. So this one's a grunge concrete. I don't believe I changed any of the settings of this one. We're going to put that into a blend. We're going to blend that over the top of our slope blur grayscale. Okay? And we're going to use a mask to mask out some parts so that it doesn't do the whole thing. Because otherwise it would look too grainy everywhere. And you can feel free to play with all of this stuff. So I put in a run grunge rough dirty, transform that to 2D and put 90 degrees in to turn it horizontal. And I blend a black and white spots with these settings, scale 1, disorder 0, roughness 1, and I blend that over this transform here. We do subtract, and now here's our result. Right? Here's the result here. We run that into a levels. I put in these, pull the sliders a little bit. It looks like I only pulled the right one down a little bit. But you can open this up. Here are the numbers if you want to put in the exact numbers for the levels. And then I put this into the opacity mask of the blend. And the blend here is at copy and opacity 0.35. All right? So that finishes off our stone details. So now we've done this whole section of the map. We're kicking right along. I understand that this is hard to go through all of this, but I promise you by the end of this, you guys are going to have tons more knowledge and be able to make just about anything. So we are just about done actually with our height map, which is nice. So here's our last blend here. The only thing we have to do is add some grout. And I kept the grout really simple. So we're just going to kind of do a crunchy moisture noise into black and white spots. So let me just run you through this graph here. So we have a moisture noise. And here are the settings for that. Scale is 6. Not sure I changed anything else. Black and white spots 2, 0.73, and 0.68. You can see I took this moisture noise and put it into a non-uniform directional warp. The moisture noise goes in the input and also the warp angle. And the black and white spots, which I gave you already, 2.73 and 0.68, goes into the non-directional warp intensity map. Okay, so that it takes these two and then kind of warp does this to it. Kind of creates a crazy pattern. Then you take this black and white spots here, which is another one, 3, 1.4, into another non-uniform directional warp, and we'll just use this one as both the intensity and the warp angle. So now you make this blobby, more blobby version. And I'll levels that out a little bit because I don't want that to be so black at the bottom end. So I pull the black slider up on the bottom. You can see here are the numbers for that if you want the exact numbers. All right. So that's our grout. Now we need to blend that with our stone details. So here's our original stone details here. And we're going to blend that with our grout. So we're going to do a height blend. Another very popular node that we're going to be using a lot in this one. That's why I have it as kind of surrounded. So in the height blend here, I don't believe I changed any of the settings. What the height blend is going to do is it takes both maps and it blends them based on which one is higher and which one's lower. So now you can look at this one. You can see here's our rocks, here's our grout, and here's where it combines them together. All right, pretty cool. So that is our height map, and that is the most important map when you're making advanced materials, obviously. And we're going to just kind of move on from there. All right, so now that we have our height map done, let's head over to the color map. If you want, you could plug in your height right away into our height output here. And then instead of just the normal, I put in a normal Sobel, and that's at intensity 5.5. And then we plug that just into our normal map output there. So now let's head over to color. The first thing we want to do is kind of variate the colors. We want to make our stone color base, and we want to variate the colors depending on what brick it's on. So first, I added in a grunge galvanic large. You see the settings there. I don't believe I changed those. Now, I usually haven't used gradient maps in general in this just because it's hard to let you know all of these values. Now, if you want to get values, one good way to do it is to like either find some medieval stone castle picture and use this gradient editor and do color pick over that. Or you could just pause my video and try to pick over my screen and try to get the same colors. Now I did that and I changed it with an HSL. I changed the hue a little bit because I didn't want it to be this browny color. And then I put that in a flood fill to color. And remember, we had to plug in way back here our original flood fill all the way to our flood fill to color. And what that does is it takes these colors and randomly sticks it in to there and makes each brick a random color. So then we're going to take a couple colors here. These ones I can show you the hexes for. There's the hex first, 66162. And here's the second hex, 90907E. We're going to blend those together with a galvanic large. Okay? So put it in there, blend, just copy, no changes to the opacity. Then we're going to blend that galvanic large with our flood fill color. And we're going to do overlay and 0.71. And for the alpha, this is where I pull up this, I'll show you. This height blend here outputs a height mask. So we'll take that height mask from there, run it up here and pin it into something because we're going to use it a couple more times. So make a little pin guy and then run that into there all the way up into our blend. And what that does is it makes sure we're blending the stone and the grout colors separately. So look at this. So now you can see you have our stone separated and it's masked off. Okay? The blend we're going to do overlay 0.71 because we want a little bit of that continuation through. So that is our stone color base. So now we're going to do stone gradients, okay? So for this one, we have to run another pin up. And this is the pin for this one is just our blend before we had the final height blend. This is the blend of just the stones. You can see it at the end of this one. And I pull that one up to this pin. We're going to use that a bunch. Okay? So we'll plug that into two gradient maps here. And then again, here's my gradient over there. Now feel free to try to color pick that or pick something else. With a lot of these colors, you're just going to have to do trial and error stuff because us going through 40 colors is just going to take too long. So the other gradient map, we got this here. You can try to pick through there. So remember, that's the gradient map created by this blend here, not the final height map, the one right before. So now we're going to take those two height maps and we're going to blend one gradient map with our base color here. You can see that. And we're going to use that mask for the grout again so that we only have the stones. And there you go. Now you can see the result of that. And now we're going to blend this over the top of that. And this blend is copy 0.22. And then we're going to blend this again using that mask over the last blend. And this is copy in 0.36. And you can see now what's starting to happen is our stone is getting a little bit more color based on kind of the depth and the gradient of everything. So now we go from this and we'll do edge wear. So this gets plugged into this blend here and I'll show you what we're blending. So first we have this grunge map here. And I did do another gradient map, so here's the colors for that, like you could try to pick. I leveled that out because this is going to be edge wear and I want it to be a little lighter. And now, so now we have to go for this mask. You can see this whole yellow line goes all the way back to that original flood fill. So it goes down, up, and then comes back here. That makes our flood fill so that we can then do our flood fill to gradient like we've done a bunch of times already. Make the angle variation 1. Here's the other settings. I don't think I changed any of them. We'll levels that out. You can see how I pulled the handles in there. Here are the numbers. Now I use that levels and we do a histogram select of that original height map. You see right here again, the one we plugged in and is doing a million things. We do a histogram select. What that does is when we pop in these values, 0.38, 0.160, you can see it has this light edge around the edges of our rocks. But we only want that to be on some corners, so we use this levels to mask that off. So then we plug that levels into the blend, we put our histogram into there, and then we just do multiply. So the blending mode is just multiply, and then that goes up in here into our blend. And if you click on that, we do the original color that we talked about already. And we do this blend here. And this is just screen and 0.27 just to kind of lighten up. And you can see how it's kind of lightening up these corners here. Okay, now after we're done with that blend, we're done with edge wear. So you can see the results of our color map as we move along. And there it is. So now we want to blend some ambient occlusions into there just to add a little bit of variation. So remember that original pin I made there. I want to use the ambient occlusion from that. So we take this original pin here from before our final height map, and then we plug these into some ambient occlusions. I do plug one into a RTAO, and this is the result here. And I plug another one into the HBAO. Okay? And we take the RTAO and the HBAO and we turn them into gradient maps. But we don't actually add anything to the gradient. We just want to be able to blend it with our color. And the HBAO blends in with our original output color. It blends in multiply 0.09. So here's the original. You can see when I click it, it adds a little tiny bit of shadowing. And then this RTAO here goes into a gradient map, and then we'll blend it over, and we'll do multiply and 0.22. So we go here, here, and now you can see it's kind of added a darkness in all of these little crevices. All right, so that's blending AO's section completed. Hopefully that was clear enough. Here are the two ambient occlusions into gradient maps. We don't actually have to put colors in. Those just go into the blends, and then we're done with that. And now, next section. And now you can see our color map is really coming along. Now let's go to detail wear next. So first I want to make a normal Sobel here. I pulled that out because it was starting to get messy. So to make the normal Sobel, let's do the same thing. Let's pull in this blend here before the final height. You can see here, there it is. I want to make a curvature map from that. So we'll do curvature smooth. And then we'll also do a curvature Sobel. So you can see the two differences. This one's smooth, and I want to blend those two together. And we'll do copy and 0.29. And that'll make a curvature map for us. Which is important because we need that to drive some of the other things we're doing here. So now we want to do edge damage, which requires curvature input. So we'll plug our curvature in there. And it also requires ambient occlusion. So remember our ambient occlusions we made back here. Here's the HBAO. Plug that right into there, and that's edge damage. Now here are the settings: levels 1, contrast 0, damage intensity 0.16. This is definitely one to play with. Okay? And we'll also do that, take that curvature map and add that into an edge wear. When all that edge wear is going to need is the curvature map. So here's the levels: 0.36, contrast 0, threshold 1, edges width 0.06. And now we're going to blend the edge damages and the edge wear together with this blend here. We'll just do max lighten. We'll just go dunk dunk, put them both together. All right. And now we're going to blend that with a version of our mask because we don't want this damage in the grout. And you can see here's an invert grayscale. That runs back all the way back to our height blend mask. See that there? It comes out, goes up to this pin, comes up here, and I have to invert it. And I invert it here, and then I blend this inverted over our damages. We do subtract. Okay, and what that does is, you can see what it does. It gets rid of the stuff that was in the grout. And then we're going to use this mask to blend some pretty simple dirt over our output from our blending AOs over there. So to make that simple dirt, we go moisture noise. Don't think I changed anything there. This is another gradient map with color in it. So you can either try to pick across the screen or try to figure out some sort of picture or something. Then we leveled that out a little bit. And you see I just pulled this white handle on the bottom down to the left. And here's the settings if you want to put the exact thing in. And we put that over the top of the export of the other one. And we blended it. We used copy with 1. And now you can see, now we have some damage on there. I'll show you the differences. Here's the first one. Nothing. Here's the second one. Now we have a little bit of damage and dirt and wear in there in our rocks. So now you can see our color map's really starting to come together. Just about done. So you guys have put up with a lot. I know this is a complicated tutorial. So now we're getting into Grout Color. So let's just do some simple uniform colors. This one's 595C59. This one is 7F7C78. And I blend those with a grunge map, which I don't believe I changed any settings for. And here's the result of that blend. Now we'll take the result of our other one over the top, blend this one in, and then use that mask that came off of our final height map here. Remember? The same one we used for the pin that we inverted there. We use that mask on copy, and here's what we get. So now we have a difference between the grout and the rocks. So now let's just add one more thing, and that's dirt. So this dirt here, you add that in. And you can change the settings. I don't believe I did, but this one takes an input of ambient occlusion and curvature. So if you remember, we made a curvature map over here in this blend. So this goes into curvature here. And ambient occlusion we have over here, and we're going to use the HbA01, the output, into here. And that creates this dirt mask, okay? And I'm just going to blend a very simple color over that, just for the sake of easiness. We've gone through quite a bit of complicated stuff at this point. So here's the number for that, 444037, and we'll blend that over. Here's the result of that little bit of extra dirt over there. And the blend is copy and 0.18. So it's the original, and here's the dirt, and you can see it kind of goes into the cracks and crevices a little bit. Here's the original, here's the dirt. Okay, so now at this point, I just adjusted the colors a little bit because I've already tested this out. And I just did this HSL here, and we just did a tiny bit of saturation, 0.505. And then we went into levels, and I just pulled the white handle out, just darkening the texture just a tiny bit. And then we did base color here, and that just plugs straight into base color. So here's those level settings, just in case you want the exact ones. And there you go, there's base color. So that's great. Those are our main ones. We've already done normal, height, and base color. So that's great. Let's keep kicking along. So now we'll do roughness. That'll be the final map we do. So for roughness, we want to bring in our height blend, our original final height, which I have kind of pinned off here, and it comes all the way down into here. And I want to invert it because I want to change what's rough and what's not rough So first I want to blend that with my dirt. So remember our dirt map up here? We'll blend those two together. And you can see we do the invert grayscale. I think I mentioned that. And then we go into the blend. And you can see we're doing subtract. Opacity 1. And then into another invert, and we'll invert it again. You can see what we're getting. And then let's levels that off. And here is how I pulled the handles for the levels. If you want, you can kind of look at that. Here's the numbers. So now we have that. And then we're going to blend that with just a bit of speckle. So I'm going to make a dirt 2 here. And here's the information of the dirt 2. I don't think I changed anything. So I just make a dirt 2 here. And I'm going to blend it with our mask because we don't really want the speckle to be on the grout. You can see the result of that. You can see that cuts the grout out. And this is a blend multiply with the dirt over the mask from the grout. Remember, the one we plugged into a million things. It's here, the height mask out. And then we'll blend those together and then we'll invert them. So now you can see them as the dark ones. And we'll multiply that over our levels here. So here's the multiply and 0.23. And then we'll run that just straight into roughness. And there you go. So now that we have everything plugged in, we're going to go over to Unreal and we're going to show you it in Unreal. So I'll save this. And let's export here. Right click on it, export outputs. I change everything to sRGB. That just simplifies things when I'm doing testing. I have my folder and I'm saving out to a bitmap. So export outputs, close. All right. Save. And let's head over to Unreal. So here we have our Unreal, level in Unreal. And here's where we're going to test it. I have a sphere, cylinder, cube, and a floor here. And here are our master materials. Now, if you're familiar with making materials in Unreal, you're going to have to make your own. If you're not familiar, I do have a tutorial that I'm going to link, and it's going to show you how to get to this point. But I'm not going to have that in every material making tutorial because it just makes the tutorials super duper too long. So once you learn it once, you're going to have it for all the tutorials going forward. So that link to how to get to this position is in the description. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a material instance off our mpom.chr right here. All right. And we're going to call it mi medieval wall or something like that. And we'll call it pom at the end, just so we know. So mi medieval wall pom. Okay. Let's get our textures into here. So import, and here's our exported textures. All right, normal map was imported as a normal map. It's great. Open up our material instance. Kind of shrink this down a little bit so we can kind of see better. And then we'll go to textures here and we'll pull our textures into our maps. So click on those, color, height, normal, and roughness. All right, so there you go. And the one setting I want to change is I want to make it bump out a little bit more. So we'll go to height ratio here. And 0.03. Okay. All right. Now let's plop our material down onto our stuff so we can look at it. So we go to materials here. Here's our medieval wall pom. Plop it onto there a few times. Plop it onto our sphere, cylinder, and cube. And I like to put it on so I can just test the different, how it looks under different conditions. Okay? So we can kind of like look in there. If you want to bump it out more, you can change that height. I'll show you that when we kind of zoom in here. So there you go. That's our medieval wall. I know it's a complicated texture, and I know it took us a while to get here. But you can see these stones, they all have nice variation. They don't look... Everything looks pretty good. And like I said before, you can go back and play with all those other settings and get all sorts of different results. So there you go. Thank you very much. I'm happy that you're here. Thanks for watching this. I thought we'd do a little bit more complicated one today. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and just feel free to play with all of the different settings to kind of get more of the results you want. And thank you very much. Have a good one.